right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to our Engage session on youth organizing and empowerment, which is joint with CASC. We have some really exciting guests on with us today, and we're excited to get started. Fatima, do you want to go to the next screen or next slide? So firstly, just a note about accessibility. If you need captions, hit the CC button at the bottom of your screen. They should be visible. I just want to briefly introduce all of us. Hi, everyone, again. I'm Aisha Ghazi Edwin, Engage Program Manager. We also have Dr. Trina Shanks, who will be joining us shortly, who leads up the initiative. Sonia Harb, our strategist. Fatima Salman, our other Engage Program Manager. And Blake Newman, our amazing field intern. And you can visit our website at the bottom to learn a little bit more about who we are. Okay, do you want to just go to the next slide? So this session is a special session in conjunction with CASC, and we are lucky to have the CASC Assistant Director Diana Seals joining us as well. So really, the focus of this session is going to be about youth engagement and empowerment, and how youth have the power and the capability to really galvanize movements for social change. So we have some youth on with us today. We're going to share their experiences, and also the Director of Youth Organizing for 482 Forward. So I want to give our speakers, Fatima, if you want to go to the next slide, just a few minutes to introduce yourselves. Talk about who you are, what you do, how you got into youth organizing. And Kayla, if you want to
start.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So I am a current student at U of M. I'm a second year. And so currently I work as a field organizing intern for Detroit Hills, Detroit. And I've worked for a couple other worked with a couple other organizations like 482 Forward, Michigan Roundtable, and other forms of organizing like community building with the BSU through the book club, and just different things. So yeah, that's a short intro for me.
Awesome, thank you for joining us. Dillon, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, yeah. Hey folks, my name is Dillon Cathro. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently the Director of Youth Organizing at 482 Forward. So it's dope to be on here on this call with both Kayla and Yamah. Went to school. I went to the School of Social Work, graduated in the summer of 2019 through the Advanced Standing Program, and focused on interpersonal practice with the focus on children and youth and families. And I've been with 482 Forward for about a year now. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome, welcome.
Hey, my name is Yamah Bahdeh. I'm a senior at Renaissance High School, and I've been an organizer for the African Bureau for Immigrant and Social Affairs for 2 years. And 482 Forward for 1. I got into this. I just like doing this stuff. So I just search for different organizations that I can be in to help others in the education system or just socially, and just working on social justice and all. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. So welcome everyone. So Fatima, you can stay on the slide. And so I want to just remind people we want this to be kind of an open conversation. As an audience member, if you have a question for any of our speakers you want to put in the chat, please feel free. So I think let's start with a little bit of just what are the main kind of social justice issues or movements that each of you are working on? And why do you feel like youth adds a needed perspective? Like why should youth be involved in these movements?
I can start. Currently, I'm working on educational justice, and also cultural awareness. I feel like it's important to be in that, important to participate in educational justice because it affects everybody from preschool to whatever, your whole educational career. And I feel like there's so many things wrong with it and so many things good with it. And I feel like a lot of people don't take as much attention to it because it's just something that we go through every day. But I feel like we shouldn't ignore it. And then cultural awareness, because I am African, I'm from Liberia, West Africa, and I feel like there isn't enough knowledge on West Africa or Africa as a whole. So, just getting information out there and advocating for our personal problems, our issues abroad and things like that would just, help us.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And you do work, Yamah, with a specific organization in Detroit. Can you tell us a little bit about them? It's the African.
The African Bureau of Immigrant and Social Affairs. So our founder, Sadie Sarr, she is Senegalese, and she works on basically just different problems that happen within our community. We have a big Muslim community. I'm personally not Muslim, but we do work on those problems and things like that, and just getting different information, whether it's educational information from the youth and everything like that, getting those that information out to parents of different cultures. So we do that by by breaking down those language barriers or just cultural barriers that might hinder them from actually being involved in their child or their own community's issues or just community advocacy. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. Dillon, do you want to share anything about why do you feel, I mean, you're the director of youth organizing, right? At 4824, why do you feel that it is essential for youth to be involved in some of these movements?
Adults talk too much and they often say the wrong things and take the wrong initiatives, which is why I was trying to let the younger folks speak first, because I think we take up so much space, in the School of Social Work and just in this line of work, we talk a lot about intersectionality, right? And the different backgrounds and experiences we have that make up our lived experiences, whether that be in Detroit or wherever we're from. And so different types of oppression hit us differently, right? The one that we don't talk about a lot as adults is the fact that we take up so much space simply because we have an age assigned to us, right? We have, I'm 27, but that shouldn't dictate that I have more to say than Yamah does, simply because I have 2 degrees and Yamah's about to graduate high school, for example, right? Mm-hmm. We often run the risk, I think, in any line of work of discounting the experiences of young people when young people often have more on the ground knowledge of social trends, of policy, the impacts of policy, whether that be on all levels of government, right? And so I think for me as a director of youth organizing, it's kind of a misnomer because I don't direct the youth at all, right? I put a set of opportunities in front of them and I'm like, you want to run with this? Cool. Let's figure out how we do it, right? So that the youth are really driving and oftentimes leading any type of initiatives that we have going on. So we're currently working on this campaign called Invest Divest, which is investing in social emotional resources in Detroit schools, whether those be charter schools or Detroit public schools, and divesting from, in the DPSCD case, the exorbitant amount of funding that goes into their police department. For those of you who don't know, Detroit Public Schools has its own police department, which receives $33 million per year in funding, which goes into, again, the personnel, and then police officers, security, metal detectors, and then also cameras. And so to put that into perspective, $33 million goes into the Detroit Public Schools Police, $1,200,000 go into nurses, and less than $800,000 goes into social workers. And yet we wonder why kids are dropping out of school. We wonder why kids, why there's a relationship between dropping out of school and the school to prison pipeline. We're not giving our students enough resource to really advocate for themselves. And part of the way to do that, to change that, is to listen instead of taking up so much space and speaking in a long-winded manner like I do. So.
I'm guilty too. But I'm happy that you brought up the policing example. No, that's going to be the focus of our next virtual discussion in February. And also, I know that youth have been instrumental in pushing that issue on the forefront. They've been instrumental in pushing that issue nationally. And I think that, the reason why we wanted to have this session is because of the fact that youth have this power to really push social issues to the forefront, whether it's criminal justice reform, whether it's policing in our schools. What are some other issues that you guys have been involved in that you think that like the youth perspective is needed?
So the organization I work for right now, Detroit Hills Detroit, they're also working on a police-free schools campaign. So along with many other things, but our focus is healing justice, and which from my perspective, it's working on yourself and getting rid of like the internalized oppressive forces that affect our daily lives, because that really takes a toll on everyone. So that's our focus there. But I would say I started capital O organizing in high school, but the culminating force to get me there has been like having those lived experiences with these oppressive forces. And a lot of the work I do is involved in education spaces, formerly with 482 Michigan Roundtable. But I think the youth are involved in every socioeconomic, every political issue that there is. So I don't think there's like a particular one. And so there's just different perspectives from the youth. And it's like youth are people before we become 18, before adults see us as adults. And so we have valuable insights to contribute to these conversations and these discourse, and even like beyond just these youth-centered conversation. Like youth need to be involved with all conversations and actually given power to make decisions on these types of issues, because I feel a lot of times it's performative, which is an issue.
Right. Thanks for sharing that. It sounds like you guys have hit on a lot of like great issues. I'd love to dive deeper into them. I want to pause for a second. Diana Seals, you have joined us. She's the Assistant Director at CASC. Hi, Diana.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me, inviting me. I've really been enjoying this conversation.
Yeah. Feel free to jump in. And it also goes for members in the audience. If you have questions you want us to ask, write them in the chat. We'll unmute you. We're not trying to, monopolize the conversation. So some of the things that I heard you guys talk about as terms of why youth are so powerful in movements is you have the ability to relate your story to bigger social justice issues, right? I mean, when it comes to actually being able to spread the word that things are happening and going on, who better than youth? You guys are really able to adapt to these new ways that we're communicating. And I feel also like you guys are not as affected as by the status quo. Like we're all entrenched in these institutions and these systems that, pigeonhole us as at a certain income or a role. And you guys don't have that, which is pretty amazing. So I wanted to talk a little bit as well about intergenerational kind of organizing. I heard Dillon, you brought it up, that it's difficult to organize with people who are older because they just don't listen. And there's that kind of that ageist component, right? So what are some tactics that you feel you guys use when you're working with people who are older than you, or when you're trying to bring other people in who are your age? Like what tactics work?
I would say just youth have to stand their ground. It's like you really have to advocate for yourself in that manner, which is kind of unfortunate. But like I said earlier, really giving youth power. A lot of times we'll be invited to the table, but not actually able to affect the decisions, or it's presented as if we can, but decisions have already been made. And so that's a huge issue. And I think working intergenerationally, there's also this like issue where really older people are kind of like marginalized in similar ways. But I think I'm kind of getting off topic, but
No.
I really think it's on behalf of the adults to give the youth the power and to actually let them affect the decisions.
Right.
I
Right.
think to add on to that, I think it's also the fact that youth have power, right? And I think it's letting youth know that they do. One of the conversations that we continue to have with the youth is like, you don't have to ask for power necessarily. You have it. What we need is a seat at the table and people to listen. That's the issue, right? I think it behooves the adults to actually understand that youth don't have to wait for them to do anything. And that's why I think adults get so frustrated when youth demand changes in their education system. Like 482 Forward just won a major lawsuit against the state of Michigan for the right to literacy, right? That was led by youth, right? Saying that they had been failed by the state to have an adequate educational experience because of a lack of up-to-date and new textbooks and teachers who either didn't teach or left very frequently, and with substandard learning conditions, with buildings that are literally falling down, right? And so the youth didn't have to be like, hey, can we have some power? No, they have power. It's like Kayla was saying, it's having people actually believe that in order to change a situation that you have to have an intergenerational approach to doing so, right? And it's kind of silly that we have to have that kind of conversation, because if we're continuing to have the same conversations about the same problems day by day, and the one common denominator is that adults are making all the decisions, well, there's your issue, right? That seems like a pretty sound mathematical equation to me, and I'm horrible at math. So, but the issue is getting adults to listen and to not pass students off as youths or as just as kids, right? So how do we do that without having to either mold our students to be adult-esque, but also and to make sure that they are being able to communicate their truth and to push their agenda in the way that best suits them, not one that best suits adults. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Like, why do we think
so also piggyback off of that, I feel like as youth, in order to get like the most popular way that we try to get adults to listen and stuff is to use the emotional appeal. And that's like, using testimonials and things like that, which is bad, because it would be better if we can just state our problems, state solutions, and get on with that. But because of the way adults do, overpower everything, we have to try to plead to them, or just try to say this is what's happening to me, and we have to literally state all the bad things that happen to us in order for them to be like, okay, I understand now, which it's horrible. Like it's bad that we have to literally go through something bad in order to change it, when it should be a change in the first place so that nobody else after us has to go through that. Yeah.
And that kind of relates to, this is like not off topic, but related. It relates to like issues that we've had in the school of social work, right? When you have students who feel like they haven't been well represented or listened to, right? And so you have to highlight your own experiences of trauma and or discrimination in some way, shape, or form to get people to listen to you. So then you have to relive it yourself. And that's what adults make youth do all the time. Like, why do we have to have testimony after testimony after testimony of kids saying that they've been slammed against lockers by cops who are 5 times their size, or saying that they had a mental breakdown at school because the one social worker that they had to go take care of the 4,000 other students that they're assigned, because in Detroit public schools, you have one social worker for every 4,000 students.
Wow.
And there are 50,000 students in Detroit public schools, right? So, and like I said, again, the budget for social workers is $779,000 versus $33 million for cops and $1,200,000 for nurses, right? So for nurses, that means you have one nurse for every 2,900 kids, youth, students, whatever, not whatever, youth. And so again, like this question of how do we respect the agency of youth, right, to impact policy in a way that isn't performative, to use Kayla's term, and also isn't reductive of their experiences, right?
That's such an important point, that it seems like we need to respect the agency of youth. We need to not think that like effective organizing happens intergenerationally, right? Like it can happen with youth leading it. Diana, do you want to jump in with anything? You know, I know that go ahead.
Oh, sure, absolutely. One of the questions I had put in the chat, and I just really want to appreciate the experience and the knowledge that's coming into this space. I mean, one of the reasons I went into teaching is because, you know, I've been an organizer in Detroit for about 20 years, and I was seeing just the incredible organizing that was being done by youth that was so innovative. And so I wanted to kind of step back and think about how I could support or even like provide you know, supporting tools. Like, this is what we learned. This is what, a lot of times, this is what didn't work. What are your ideas? And here's some of the history of organizing in the city. But my question that I kind of put in the chat was that I really believe that education should provide tools that we need to build the kind of world that we want to live in, or the kind of world that we would like to see. So if that was to be true, what kind of advice would you have for the University of Michigan, or really any educational institution, if it's providing tools to build a new world?
I have a lot on that. If anyone else wants to start first.
I'm sorry, what did she say?
I can restate it. So one of my thoughts around education is that it should be giving us tools that would help us to build the kind of world that we want to see, the kind of world that we would like to live in. So if that was to be true, what would you have to say to the University of Michigan particularly, but really any educational institution?
Okay, so it's kind of a hard question because like it's a lot, but I would just really like press on just being a safe space, really. Being able to give students like students do have the opportunity to, you know, express themselves, but it's really just the action that happens after. Like, what I've seen from myself when I go to, you know, authority to try to issue a problem or something like that, usually is I get like a passive response. And that's what I would like, you know, want to change, is that don't just listen to our problems, you know what I mean? Like, we know they're there. Now, if we can stress that when students bring up solutions and everything like that, but also the adults need to make these solutions happen, basically. I feel like when we do all the, like what I was saying before, when we, you know, express ourselves and we say these testimonials and everything like that, it's like, yeah, and then it kind of goes over their head. Now, really, our main problem is just action. And there's so many action plans, but they're not being put out because of sometimes what matters more is not the financial aspect of things, it's just humanitarianism as a whole. You know, how do these students feel? How do you really feel, other than how much am I spending on their feelings, for example? But yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to chime. Go ahead, Kayla.
Thanks. I would just say one thing in particular that comes to mind to me is that the university has a lot of these, I think they pride themselves on having a lot of these DEI efforts, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, which I think are very corporate, capitalist centered. I won't say nonsense, but it's not as impactful as it could be. And oftentimes, to a previous point, it re-traumatizes those marginalized. And I think oftentimes in effort to teach, it's a predominantly white institution, and trying to teach the white students about these issues like racism, points of oppression, etc. Students who are marginalized in the classes, they're re-traumatized from that. And that innately puts this hierarchy in place that their learning is more important than my emotional experience. And we're almost expected to be desensitized to it because I can't go into the class lead-in with emotions, because then that's not logical discussion. And so the university really needs to reevaluate their race and ethnicity requirement and what that actually is, because I think that's a bit performative in a way, and just the corporate nature of their DEI efforts. It's got to go.
And I think to add on to that from like a more inside perspective, because when I was in the School of Social Work, my internship was with the Office of Student Conflict Resolution. And so I worked in their adaptable resolution processes for sexual misconduct cases. And so I think along with what Kayla's saying and what Yamah is saying about, one, listening to youth and also rethinking the ways in which we address intersectionality, right? And really try to create not equality, but equity. We also have to think about like the student support services that are available within a university, right? And what they look like, who's staffed, who's not, and what types of processes we have to support students who are going through any type of crises, right? Whether that be in the realm of Title IX. I mean, the current system for doing any type of Title IX reporting can be and is oftentimes a form of secondary trauma for people. We're re-traumatizing people by having them go on trial necessarily with the person that they are labeling as having been responsible for their harm, right? So I think to get back to the question, I think in terms of the work that we do with community organizing, I think I'm always skeptical of large corporations or businesses or universities getting involved because University of Michigan has a big name. And sometimes that name can take over the work, can take over the image, and sometimes that image isn't welcome, right? So I think providing tools, like you said, is key, right? Whether tools be like funding or like networking opportunities, things like that, or really using the U of M image and the Block M to highlight the work that all these organizations like Detroit Heals Detroit and Avisa and Forward to Forward are doing. Putting it on the map that not only do some of these students either go to Michigan, but also Michigan supports the work that's being done to create equity within our communities. Right, and providing maybe some grants that are just like kind of free flowing, give us some money, that'd be great. But let us use it to our own, to do the work. Because I think to create equitable movements and equitable change, you need people on all levels to participate, but the amount of participation needs to be equitable and representational of where we're going, if that makes sense.
And I'll have one more specific point going towards spaces, specifically for certain groups. I guess I'm referencing particularly to Trotter, the Trotter Multicultural Center, which was supposed to be a center where Black students can really convene and have a sort of safe space, but that is not what it is anymore. And the university the students have been trying to advocate for that specific safe space for Black students. And I'm sure this is true for across other racial lines or just points of marginalization, but the university, I think, needs to offer those spaces.
Wow, thank you all so much for your comments on that, and certainly it makes a lot of sense around the resources part. I also saw that Tyler had her hand up and wanted to chime in, I think, around this question.
Oh yeah, thanks. My name's Ty. I am a 20-month student in the MSW program. So this is my last semester. It's exciting. I just wanted to comment on like accountability, you know, being a young adult who's 28 inside an institution that's hierarchical, I have a role to play. And so, you know, what I see is like the tokenizing that I heard Yamah Bahdeh talk about is like, you know, happening rampant through our program. Like it's a real thing. And when we're asked like what tools or resources should the university provide, there's also a level of accountability that needs to go with that. Just like when we implement new programs, there needs to be like pre-evaluation and post-evaluation. You know, you can't just ask us like, hey, can you give this college tour? By the way, will you please say this, that, this, and the other? Also, don't talk too much about your personal experience because we don't want you to make the M look bad. That's a role I have to play, you know, as like a student leader, as an individual that is going to school on a scholarship, as an individual that is also biracial, an individual that is also from, you know, like in a marginalized area in Michigan. All of that sometimes helps advance DEI initiatives. And when the initiatives are still being gatekept and you know, dictated by the people who are asking us for resources, we're never going to have true access to the opportunities we want and talk about. And that's why it's so hard to like put a name to all this, because we don't have frames for it. And that's been divisive. And so it's not that like anybody's doing anything on purpose. We've just been operating this way for a long time. And youth are also people with real experiences. And so am I, and so are instructors. And I don't want to go on a tangent, but I just wanted to like tie all that together from my experience.
And in addition to that, I feel like institutions as a whole, like whether it be high schools, colleges, universities, things like that, they focus so much on their image and it overpowers the youth, you know, their how they feel, you know what I mean? And I feel like, yes, it's their institution's image, you know, connects to funding and all that stuff. But I feel like we need to change the mission of what we're trying to do, or the target. Like, do we want to ensure a safe space for, or, you know, a safe space for youth and a good system as a whole, or do we want money? I feel like that's the two things that's on the spectrum. So yeah, just changing we want to happen as a whole. Like, do we want students to feel like this is like, you know, do we want students to feel comfortable, or do we feel like money to these institutions are more important than students' well-being?
I love that you just said that. Like, and I don't want to talk too much, but I just think it's what you touched upon with what is the mission, or what are the core values of an institution? Like such a key question that I'm not sure I ever heard anyone ask at the University of Michigan, at least when I was there, right? And I think if the core values of the institution do not include equity and, you know, true representation, then that's an issue, right? Because then it's not going to be consistent with what the needs of the students are. I think that's an excellent point.
You know what I
think?
Oh,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I think there's also some very actionable items that the university can do to help the well-being of students, because at the end of the day, like, individuals make up groups and communities, and going from a healing justice framework, I think that students should like be allotted like self-care days, and specifically marginalized students, like considering the emotional labor that they go through on the daily in such a tumultuous political environment. And also, I feel there should be like mandatory trigger warnings for if a course is going to talk on a certain subject, because like policing and whatnot, like it can re-traumatize students, and I don't feel like it's treated the same way that other things are, and students aren't given the necessary forewarning for that. So really focusing on the individual and the individual well-being, because in a capitalist society that predicates its success on exploitation and overworking, students we need to be able to rest and decide like when we need to rest.
That's great. Yeah, I want to give Irene the opportunity to ask her question. Irene, do you want to unmute yourself, or let me see if I can unmute you? Not, I can just read it out as well. And this goes along with what we have been talking about. So Irene said it was mentioned that there needs to be safe spaces. What does safe spaces? What does safe spaces include or look like to you, for you?
I put it in the chat, but those who didn't see the chat, I said that safe spaces would include would be like an what did I say? Would be a social study group basically, and just having youth and adults included and stating the youth will state problems and solutions, and adults will work with them to create specific either projects or advocacy organizations, things like that, to execute these issues or execute the solutions to these issues, and with the main goal to affect not only the youth but to affect everybody in the community, because it affects everybody.
I would say specifically in the context of youth need to be given the space to discuss, talk, organize, separate from adults, I feel like, because adults can subconsciously, unknowingly, even by not speaking, but just being in the room, impact those discussions. And so youth need to be given that separate space. And so when they come to that decision, I suppose the adults are there to advise them, but there's like a difference between advising and ruling. So that in the specific context of youth, and other things, I'll just speak for myself, like at the university, the Black students, they need a space to convene. It's as simple as that. And that space has been taken, it's been co-opted. The university doesn't have specific language in its purpose of Trotter, though it was communicated that that's what it was for, but it's really not. And half the time it's rented out for like corporate events and just different stuff. So yeah, just a space to convene.
And
I feel like I'm sorry.
Nope, you go ahead.
Oh, I feel like another like safe space would be like I said before, breaking down language barriers. I feel like that's a big problem, because in order to really express yourself and to include the whole community, I mean, like, not everybody just speaks English, and like speaking from Abisa, most of us speak either French or any other African languages and everything like that, or even tribal languages. I feel like those really hinder youth, because I know some of my friends who aren't that good in English, and they have a hard time. Even myself, I have a hard time expressing myself the way I really want to, because I don't speak the same language as other people. I feel like if we have more ambassadors that speak other languages, that will help bring more attention to certain issues that don't only affect our communities but other communities also. Yeah.
150%. And Yamah and I have been talking about that a lot, because we usually actually speak to each other in French. So it's really weird speaking in English with Yamah right now, because I'm not used to it. But no, language access is so important. And so one of the sad things, but also like a cool thing that came out of it, was that DPSCD, for example, for the longest time, so DPSCD is Detroit Public Schools for folks that aren't aware, they have not done an excellent job of getting translated resources out to communities, right? So one of our partner organizations, the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation, took it upon themselves to translate all DPSCD documents that were going home into Spanish, particularly into language that was accessible. you know, so not your proper like Royal Academy of Spain, you know, dictionary, but like what people are speaking on the street when they're, you know, when they're just like working or going home or at home, you know, so that it's actually accessible to people. And then I was on a call previously with some youth from Access. And so these youth that I was talking about, they're from the Arab American community. Most of them are Yemeni, but the school they go to, Universal Academy in Dearborn, all the teachers are Lebanese. And so what they talk about is the fact that there's a shared language, right? But Arabic, but then there are different dialects. And so if they're speaking in Arabic in their own dialect, then they're told that it's wrong, right? So representation means that you can speak whatever language you want and know that you're not going to be judged for it, right? And then also, I love what Kayla was saying about people needing spaces on campus. And I know that's really hard to do on Michigan's campus for a lot of reasons, particularly because Michigan lost that affirmative action lawsuit a while ago, making it really hard to have any type of affinity groups that are sponsored by the university, right? But I also think that's a cop-out. I think there are different ways to create spaces for people of the same social, ethnic, racial, religious groups, whatever, to be able to really convene, and for that to be supported, even in like just like in whatever context is possible from an institution that's binded by a lawsuit. That needs to happen, right? So that students feel like, yep, they're doing the best that they can to help us literally just be on campus. And in a DPSCD context and in Detroit schools context, we need schools that aren't falling down. Like, you know, a safe space also means you can actually learn in a room where you're not going to be freezing cold in the winter and blistering hot in the summer. It means that you're not getting hand-me-down books that are outdated, that are saying that Christopher Columbus was an OG, right? Like, it's not okay, you know? And that really focus on an anti-racist ethnic studies approach to teaching geography, history, even looking at maps and how the maps that we look at in the States are skewed to make the United States look huge when it's actually not as big as it is. You know, little things like that to make sure that we're actually giving youth not only the space to be emotionally safe, but to also practice and flex their intellectual capabilities and their just vocational capabilities in a way that isn't hindering them, right? Why not let youth mold themselves instead of constantly trying to mold them, right? Because I've been more molded by the youth that I work with than I have molded them. I know that for damn sure.
I want to give an opportunity to Trina. You had a question earlier on. Would you like to unmute yourself? Go ahead and ask it.
It's way past now. It was when we're talking about should there be interaction across generations. And I just wondered if for you, it's a priority to work across generations, or would you rather work just with yourselves? And then if you do want to have kind of more intergenerational collaboration and you haven't been invited to the table, how do you break in? But you kind of talked about it already. So if you don't want to go way back there again, I'm fine if you don't answer it.
I think the question you posed though about would we prefer to be alone versus intergenerational, I think that's a really interesting question. And I think initially I would probably say alone as a reaction just to how we haven't been able to before. But I, of course, find value in perspectives from older people and who have experienced this, especially like older organizers and whatnot, because not just because they're older doesn't mean they have the advice that's relevant. And so I think that's a huge difference. And a difference I don't think a lot of adults recognize. But so intergenerationally, with the caveat that there needs to be the room that if we decide we want to be amongst ourselves, it can happen.
Thank you.
And I also think from a youth organizer standpoint, one thing that I really have valued is my interactions with the youth's parents, right? Because I think one of the things that's always interesting is where the lack or the gap in communication happens. And I think sometimes with our youth, for example, like from my end, I'm doing a bunch of organizing logistics things. I'm making spreadsheets and all this stuff, and I'm working with my youth one-on-one and texting them. But I'm not a teacher, and we're also virtual, and so doing this type of work and not knowing their parents is really weird to me. And then you forget when you're doing youth organizing that oftentimes folks do have guardians, parents at home who they also have responsibilities to or for, right? And so for me, what we're trying to do, and I've been speaking with Yamah about this, is having parent workshops to let our parents know in our network what we're doing, to see if they want to have their own parent organizing collectives, right? And or just to make sure that they know what their youth is getting into. So they might be like, yo, this is super dope. Let's tell your uncle about it. Let's get everybody on, things like that. Or just, okay, thanks for letting me know. And just start conversations there. Because then I think to get to Kayla's point, that's also another point of, do I want you to lean into this? Or do I just want you to know what we're doing, right? And I think that's the balance. And particularly, again, with language access, we work with families that, have so many languages represented, right? That we are still working on creating a truly intersectional and inclusive organizing movement where, if you don't speak English, you shouldn't have to, because we have so many people on staff or within the youth collective and our larger community that speak these languages that the lack of communication shouldn't be happening, right? But it's just, we're so busy. And so really creating opportunities for intergenerational organizing, but leaving it to the youth to decide how they want to move forward, I think is really important.
I think the parent and guardian aspect of it is really interesting, especially in the context of education, because in my experience, I found that administrators, teachers, whomever is in charge, they see themselves as being responsible to the parents. The stakeholders are the parents, where the stakeholders are the parents and the students, and they're not one, because we can have difference in opinion. Like the parent doesn't necessarily speak for the child, which is could probably be an abrasive concept to a lot of people, but it's the student who goes through the system every day and who's the expert on their own experience. And so acknowledging their expertise is essential.
Also, just a quick comment. I feel like I would agree with Kayla's first statement saying like alone because of the way it happened previously. But I feel like it would be important to have, older generation, the younger generation there, but with the younger generation being the control, you know what I mean? Like if there was the smaller ratio of adults to students, I feel like it will be a little bit more effective, or even if it was the same, but I feel like the youth should have the control over that meeting and not the adults, controlling it.
That's great. Thank you guys so much. Tyler, you said a little bit earlier, and this goes a little bit backwards, but I think that it's still relevant. Do you want to ask your question about restorative circles?
Yeah. I was wondering what your all thoughts were about youth-led restorative circles, so like when trauma is happening in the classroom and you have that same class the next week, how important is it for you to be able to like lead a restorative circle so that when you come back to class that Wednesday, you feel safe?
This is something I'm absolutely all for, and it's a lot of what Detroit Hills Detroit works on. This sort of restorative healing focus. I think it's necessary, and going back to a point earlier, like this is one of the tools that students can get, learning how to do these restorative circles, learning how to do peer-on-peer de-escalation, going to Dillon's point about the policing in schools. These are just some of the ways in which we can divest and invest into other aspects, because going a little bit off, but this is like the sort of field that I want to work in specifically. It's like education policy, one day hoping to like have open like my own, or not my own, but like a decolonized sort of school. And I've been doing like a little research on freedom schools in Detroit. And this is like the method they use, these restorative justice circles, because oftentimes perceived misbehavior
Well, I think that we may have lost Kayla.
No. Well, hopefully Kayla comes back because what she was saying was super dope.
It was awesome, yeah.
But I think de-escalation and like de-escalation training and tactics need to be implemented in all levels of education, I think. And we need to support teachers and administrators to actually put them into practice, right? I worked as an in-school suspension teacher in a middle school before coming to grad school. And it was so sad how automatic the response was for teachers just to simply rely on school resource officers to handle any type of discipline, right? There was no talking to the student. There was no trying to figure out who they really were close to in the school to figure out what was going on, to de-escalate or just calm down. No, it was you're being a disruption. Let's put you in handcuffs, right? And I'm not a very large person. A lot of the students I've worked with between the ages of 12 and 22 are a lot bigger than I am. And I have no desire to get into a fight with anybody. However, I think if you describe yourself as an educator, a teacher, a professor, whatever, then you are putting yourself into a line of work that is going to require you to learn not only how to affect good pedagogy and teach and grade papers well. It's also about behavioral management. It's about behavioral response. It's about creating restorative justice circles within your classroom if there's ever a conflict, because there always will be one, right? And that also goes to the university level, right? And that gets more nuanced because you have clinical professors, adjunct, you have people who are going through the tenure track process, people who have tenure. And so there are different responsibilities or feelings of responsibility for the well-being of students. And yet at the same time, if you call yourself a professor, you need to be able to handle uncomfortable situations, right? Whether that be in a crisis situation, like, a couple of years ago, there was a scary, it didn't turn out to be a crisis on campus, but we thought that there was an active shooter on campus. I don't know if you remember that. There were a lot of students who were upset in the School of Social Work because some of their professors left the classroom and left them alone in the classrooms when people thought that they were afraid. And so similarly, we wouldn't want that to happen to students in Detroit public schools, right? We need teachers to be, and that's like an aggravated or like exaggerated case, right? But in any situation where there's going to be a sense of conflict, teachers need to be able to have the agency to do that themselves, and so should youth, right? Youth are smart. I don't care how old you are. I believe that youth can handle their own situations, their own forms of conflict if you allow them to do so, right? So how do we create restorative justice circles that can be led and facilitated by people on all spectrums of age and positionality?
It looks like Kayla is coming back in. Thank goodness. She was saying some pretty amazing stuff. Kayla, are you with us? Hi, Kayla, we see you.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. We're talking about wanting to go into education policy and things that are so relevant. Do you want to keep talking about what you were sharing?
I think I was getting a little into freedom schools.
Yeah.
But just driving the point of decolonizing the education system and reimagining the ways in which we think of and view education, because there are many more better ways to go about it. But yeah.
I decided to attend a webinar.
I think that was someone in the background. Does anyone else have any questions for our speakers that we didn't get a chance to get to?
Yeah, Kayla, I know I added you in the chat, but feel free to hit me up like privately if you want to discuss it.
Can you resend it? I don't know if it'll pop up since I read.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Is that a question you feel like you could ask to the whole panel? I mean, I feel like it's really relevant.
Yeah.
Some of the to some of the
Yeah,
organizing that's
absolutely.
happening right now.
Yeah, no, that's refreshing to hear you say, because for some reason it's taboo sometimes. But I'm wondering about, the youth perspective on spirituality versus, religion and how it can be used as a youth empowerment practice, or to, continue to build community and reinforce those healing circles, because we can't like make the external world, do what it needs to do, but we can still, maintain that strong base, or that, that strong community. I don't want to go on a tangent, but I'm in spirituality and social work class right now, so this is where my mind's at.
I would say just really, I think the youth are really open. Well, I can't speak, but challenging the status quo and not staying with necessarily what we have now just because it's what we have now, because it's not working. So just being open to changing things. And there's really good research on it and how beneficial it is, and especially for marginalized students, because we know bias is really subconscious bias, racial bias, microaggressions. Those things are present everywhere, and especially can have an impact on students in those formative years. And so I think healing justice circles allow for trying to get an understanding of where things went wrong on both sides. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Kayla basically said everything. I mean, yeah, I was going to say the same thing, but yeah.
Agreed, but I have nothing to add. Kayla stole the show on that one, so.
Sorry. I think it's an important question. Hannah Lefton, you have just put a question in the chat. I'm going to unmute you so that you can ask it.
I just said in the chat that I know youth are underrepresented in politics for a lot of various reasons that I'm sure we could have an entirely separate webinar about. But in terms of other places besides like national politics for youth to get involved who are interested in like youth organizing and things, do you guys have any suggestions of either like youth organizers for people to follow on social media or other places to draw inspiration, or like specific ideas of places where youth can kind of make their voices heard and have more positions of power and responsibility?
Oh, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We just had an organizing. This is hilarious.
So
Yamah.
You can go ahead, Dillon. My bad.
Okay, I'll say that.
Okay, so currently in my school, we have a Senate, and we participate in Michigan Youth and Government. I feel like can y'all hear me?
Yeah. I think you have a lag, but we can hear you. And I think that we may have lost you. Oh no.
All right, Kayla, you go.
Yeah. Okay. I was gonna say that most, at least for Detroit, that I know of, a lot of organizations, they have social media. Detroit Hills Detroit, the organization I work for, we have a social media, and it's just Detroit Hills Detroit. I know 4824 does. And just a lot of different things. And so what I like to do is go through who those organizations, who they're following, because most of the time they are following other organizations. And yeah, that's what I'll say. Oh, and Detroit Hills Detroit, we're actually have our application open right now for youth who want to be organizers. So there's opportunity open right now.
Yamah is back. Sorry, we think we lost you, but you were.
Yeah, yeah, my connection was so bad.
That's okay.
I had a feeling you guys couldn't hear me. My bad. But Kayla, were you done? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Talk about EMEACE.
Okay, so EMEACE is Michigan Youth in Government. A lot of schools in Michigan participate in them, and I know that other states have their own youth in government programs too. I feel like that is a great way to express like what we want to change in schools. I feel like, okay, so what we do basically, we make bills. Our bills are made up by ourselves. We have a whole, we have kind of an outline, and we have bills, and usually our bills kind of relate to us. So one of my bills one year was I wanted what's it called? I wanted foreign language to be mandatory for all 4 years. And I felt like that was important to me because I feel like it was important to have a diverse, diverse youth as a whole. But that was just an example. And I feel like that program is very, very good. It's some downsides to it because it is, at least for Michigan Youth Government, it's majority white. And so, we sometimes our problems as minorities, when we present them, they're kind of they're not looked at as important as others. But I feel like personally, if you want to advocate for your bill, as much as you can, your bill can definitely be passed, and it gets passed on to Michigan legislature, and then sometimes it can be created as a real law. So Michigan Youth Government is a very good program.
That's awesome. Thank you for dropping that. And just so you guys know, we are going to send out a list of like resources that you're mentioning to everyone who attends. So this is super helpful. And if you have other events you want to plug or things you're involved in that you want us to like check out or potentially help with, do let us know. Oh, Dillon, were you going to say something?
Only that we, over Sunday and Monday, we had a youth organizing retreat for MLK Day. And we invited these folks from LA, and I believe their organization is called Brothers Saving Selves. And they're part of a coalition of organizers in California that have been pushing forward similar initiatives that we're doing here in Detroit in terms of getting cops out of schools and also making restorative justice practices more institutionalized in their schools, right? And I would check them out, y'all, because this past summer in June, they were able to divest 35% of the LA police budget and invest that money into community resources. And so the difference is they've been on this trend for the last 10 years. And so they had 10 years to cultivate youth organizers and youth agency, right? To the point where they also had kind of a chapter of their organization within schools so that people could go to like this after school program if they met like certain requirements, they weren't failing classes, things like that, so thinking about thinking about like positions that we can get students on is really important, but also giving credence to the grassroots organizing that happens is also really necessary, because we know that the current methods of maintaining democracy or like pushing for social changes are usually stagnated by bureaucracy. Right. And so thinking outside of the box about how we can push youth and support youth in taking on whatever mantle or issue they want to face and doing it in a way that is really central and true to where they come from is important. Right. Because we know politics can be really it can be a toxic place. It can also be a corrupting place. Because you go in with all these hopes and wishes and changes. And I'm reading Obama's memoir right now, and homie did not get to do everything he wanted to do, and he became a little corrupt too along the way, because that's what it does to you. And so I think it's not an if or, but it's like a both. You know, we need to support folks in both ways to enter into these change spaces in whatever way is most comfortable or true to what they want to do and what they want to achieve.
I'm so glad you brought that point up, Dillon, because the youth, we have different politics just like adults do. You know, we're not a monolith. And so youth have different ways in how they want to go about change. Some want to do it institutionally through politics, others don't and want to push from the outside. There's this quote by, his name is Ebony Donnelly. He's a partner of Erica Hart, who's a sexual educator, who's actually, she's a prominent social media activist, I suppose. But I like her. But anyway, the quote was that often, and I'm paraphrasing, oftentimes we go into systems, situations, institutions with the intent of, like, what is it? As insurrection is, we want to, I'm missing the word. Infiltrate. We go with the intent of infiltrating, but we come out emulating. And I thought it was just really powerful because, and I think it's true, and I think it speaks to Dillon's point. But I just bring that up to say that the youth have different politic, and we have different approaches in how we want to go about bringing change, and they're all necessary. So.
Wow, yeah. That's a beautiful quote. And also that shit that comes through with this invest divest, right? Because not all of our youth are on the same page about what it actually means, right? Does invest divest mean we're getting rid of police? We want them all gone, right? A lot of our youth would say, yeah. A lot of our youth would say, well, police brutality is a systemic problem and it comes from racism, but I don't think we have to get rid of police totally. We have to reform the police, right? You know, there are varying like testimonies on that and viewpoints on that, you know. So the unifying factor though is that everybody agrees that mental health resources are absolutely underfunded and lacking, you know. And so what we are figuring out is what are the youth able to agree upon, right? What are we actually going to move forward with? Divestment, absolutely. How much? Who's to say? Right? I would love to divest from all this $33 million. Like, why do we have metal detectors, y'all? Like, if you ever worked in a school in Detroit or a city like Detroit, you know that like if there's ever like a happenstance where like there's any type of weapon in the school, you know that weapon ain't for school. It's for the walk home. Like 9.5 times out of 10, any type of weapon that you bring into a school is for the walk home because school is supposed to be your safe space, right? And I don't know the last time I heard about a school shooting in Detroit either. So the fact that we have metal detectors is pretty irrelevant at this point. So that's my TED Talk for the day.
Just to piggyback on what Dillon said, yeah, everything with that, like metal detectors, everything. And like specifically, like I can only speak on Renaissance, but we have security guards and all these people who are here, but they do nothing, you know. And there has been some instances where like I'll be in class and I've seen somebody with a weapon. I'm just like, how did you get into school? You know? And it's just like, okay, so you're spending all these, like, we're updating all these metal detectors, updating the cameras, everything like that. And, you know, if something were to really happen, those things will still happen. Like these things that we're putting in place, I forgot what the word is, but the things that we're putting in place to protect students are actually working. So if, like, you know, if that's what your goal was, your goal it's not being, you know, it's not being, what's the word? I forgot the word. But basically, we're not getting there. And I feel like that's where we start to see, like, where is this money really going? Because we're at this point, we're just giving jobs to people for no reason, or we're just buying stuff for no reason when we could be putting money into other smaller organizations within that school. Yeah.
So well said. And I just want to stop and really thank you guys for your perspectives. and your experience and your emphasis on respecting, the agency and the intelligence of youth. It's so important. It's messages we need to hear. I'm gonna let like 2 more questions before we close, and I also want to give the speakers a chance to kind of get some closing thoughts or anything else they may want to say. There was a question in the chat from Ryan Kellett. So I'm gonna unmute you, Ryan, so you can ask it.
Sure thing, thank you. And then thank you, Dillon, Kayla, and Yamah for doing this. I'm an undergraduate junior in CASC right now, and have learned so much through that, and learned especially a lot from the 3 of you today, so I appreciate it. So wanted to ask, as an undergraduate student, but as well as a heterosexual cisgender white male, I was wondering how students from these, incredibly privileged backgrounds and identity groups like myself can be effective allies to my fellow students who are doing, these critical community efforts from these marginalized communities. So we're just curious if the 3 of you had any thoughts on that, because I'd love to learn and help out while still being respective that, these organizers that are experiencing sort of these injustices should be the ones empowered to drive that change. So
I feel like having allies of different backgrounds, whether it be minorities or just people from different places, will help your cause to be more diversified. When you have people who have opposing views or the same views, they bring up conversation, they bring up other issues, or just the way that somebody thinks. And when you get into the way somebody thinks, you can find out ways to help that that person if they do need help. So I feel like just finding people who agree with you and people who don't agree with you will help you kind of bring that together.
So something I learned that I found was interesting was this differentiation between like allyship and being like an accomplice along with someone. I can't remember who theorized this, but I'm sure if you look it up, you'll be able to find something. But the difference is like between this passive nature of allyship and the activeness of being an accomplice. And I say that to say, what am I trying to say? I suppose just in the classroom being cognitive that like you're not taking up so much space, especially around issues like this, because I found that to be a huge issue. And also saying stuff when we're not in the room. I don't know, I'm not really good on allyship advice, but I would say look up the theory between allyship and accomplice, and that'll lead you in the right direction.
So I really, I appreciate both of these questions, the one that Ryan put in and then the one that was followed up by Sarah. And I think I agree with both what Kayla and Yamah said. You need multiple people from various backgrounds to make a movement grow and push forward. But I also think I love the differentiation between allyship and accomplice. And the difference to me is if you're an ally, you feel bad that stuff is happening to people who don't look like you, right? And you want to do, and like you have a desire to see these things change, right? But the way I've seen allyship come through is that this desire doesn't translate to necessarily changing the inherent discriminatory structures that are in place, because people who are at the top echelons of society based on privilege and identity and background have an invested interest to maintain that status, right? Even knowing that status is antithetical to Black and brown folks and people of varying sexual identities and gender identities and where we come from, right? So if you're an accomplice, that means you want to see this shit change, right? And you're willing to see that change and have privileges that you currently have that weren't earned go away, right? So that's the difference for me. And And so, and I'm mixed. My mom is black, my mom is white, my dad's black. And so particularly what Kayla was saying about when you're in the classroom, and this relates to social workers too, right? Is I grew up with white people, and I learned to code switch real early. Code switch means you talk differently to people depending on who they are because you receive differently, right? So particularly when you're in a classroom, what I've learned is that I grew up in a certain way, and I grew up with privileges and a lot of not privileges too, right? If I can't speak on the situation that I've actually lived, I don't speak. What I will do is counteract any inaccurate statements or opinions about people that I hear people from a privileged class or a different class say, right? So I think that's where like white allyship comes in. You ain't speaking for black people, you ain't speaking for people of color, right? But you are saying what you're saying is inherently racist, and here's why, right? And similarly, so it's kind of like Kayla was saying, learning when and when not to step in, right? Because what does happen a lot is you have a lot of white folks come into a setting where there's predominantly people of color organizing spaces. They want to do good work, but they oftentimes monopolize the conversation, centering their own guilt in whatever they're doing. So the question is, are you leaning in because you personally feel guilty for being white and having unearned privileges, or are you leaning into the space because you actually want to change the system? Because it's not the same thing, right? Similarly with social workers, I caution social workers from the University of Michigan of getting involved in Detroit if you haven't ever been to Detroit or a school like, or a city like Detroit. I caution you against it. I caution you against it because low-key, you ain't welcome. You need to have a background in working with communities in Detroit or like communities in Detroit to understand the nuances of how you show up. I remember I was in a program evaluation course, and we were doing an evaluation with Grace in Action in Southwest Detroit. I can't tell you how many people brought their UMich backpacks with them. I was like, why are you announcing that the University of Michigan is here in mass, right? And then they were like, oh, the grass is so high and these houses are dilapidated. I was like, then why the fuck did you come? Like, leave. This isn't your place. This isn't your community. Like, go home. You know what I'm saying? And so social work, reminder, social work was not an inherently inclusive practice. We've had to change it, right? It was co-opted by white folks because black folks and people of color have been doing social work since the beginning of time. We just gave it a name, right? And so for social workers, your job is to think about where am I best placed? Where am I going to have the most positive, equitable, sustained impact, right? And so I really like how these questions are framed, because you're not actually, you weren't necessarily asking, hey, people of color, how can I be a better white person, right? That's not what I was hearing from you, and I really like that, because a lot of people do that. What you're asking is, how can I be supportive at this time? And so really my advice to that is staying in your lane until you figure out where your lane's actually going, right? If you're actually in a place where you can change from one lane to another and have a positive impact, do so. If you can't, work on the people in your community that still have, backwards opinions on basic things like identity and equity and access. Because that's where we need you, because people won't listen to me because I'm an angry black man unless I talk like a white man. And then that's just not true to who I am. So I'm not going to do that.
Another point added to that, I would say, do your learning not in with these people, like marginalized folks, because that messy process of going through it, you can really harm folks in the process. And your learning isn't more important than them being traumatized in that sort of way. So.
I also wanted to emphasize what Dillon said about if you can't find a specific way to help other communities other than your own community, I feel like you should go back to your community and see what needs to be fixed there first. I feel like, well, I personally don't know, but I'm pretty sure there is things that are wrong in your community, and listening to us, you can get some feedback and just oh, this is how it works and this is how they think, and you can bring that back to your community and let them know, and then you can create tactics to fix problems within your community and bring them out to those other communities, which are your allies and everything like that, and then bring up a bigger picture.
I do want to say,
if that makes sense. I hope.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I keep thinking about what Kayla said earlier about adults having limitations as well. And, you know, I'm an adult. I'm also a person of color who is white passing, depending on who you ask. I'm also, you know, older, and I'm in these situations where I want to call people in, or I want to use my privilege, or I want to let people know that they're like, you know, stepping on me or using their privilege, you know, to harm me. But those are emergent conversations. And when we go back to our communities, even though it's the right thing to do, it's sometimes idealistic because there's shame and there's guilt. And there's also, you know, beating ourselves up. And that gets in the way of ownership of our identities. And so, like Ryan, you came with identity first instead of asking, you know, a specific group of people to like teach you something or share something, you know, that you didn't know. And that's not harmful, and that's awesome. But going back to your own community might like prove a different story. And it's just really important to, you know, share that perspective, even when you are having these sensitive conversations, because it's twofold. It's a relationship that we're in, I think, with each other. You know, there's interpersonal work, there's external work, and then, you know, there's our reflexive practice in social work. And it's telling ourselves hard truths and, you know, making mistakes and upholding personal boundaries within your family or your social networks to still call people in or stand in your truth as long as it doesn't harm you, or as long as it doesn't also affect your own basic needs. You know, some parents might kick you out if you just start calling them out on being racist or being too white, especially if you're just figuring out that you're white. You know what I mean? It's a truth, it's a paradox of our society. And so, you know, we should expect shame and guilt, but also like it's an emergent practice is what I'm saying. And I think that goes for all of our perspectives, if you don't mind me saying.
You guys are dropping a lot of wisdom. I just want to say thank you again for sharing your experiences with us, your knowledge with us. Please, if there's something that you didn't get a chance to mention in regards to, you know, organizations or events coming up that you want people to support, just email them to me and we will pass it along. Do you guys have any closing thoughts? Or Diana, do you have any closing thoughts or anything from CASC?
Yeah, my only closing thought is, I don't want to take up very much space, except that I appreciate the opportunity to listen and to learn and to hear everything that was shared. I just feel like this is what is being presented today is the kind of world that I want to live in. And I feel like that's why it is the perfect place to be supporting youth leadership, because we are headed in a direction that is exciting. And I think the only thing to share from CASC is that one of the reasons I love teaching as part of it, or being part of the program, is that it's you know, connecting some of the history and like bringing some of the different pieces and bringing some of the different experiences the organizers have, and hopefully like where we can learn and share and talk about these important conversations. And just, you know, like accomplices, not allies, was brought into the conversation, and that came out of Standing Rock. And Standing Rock was a place where spirituality was used a lot as an organizing tactic and strategy. And like by bringing organizing place and culture into the organizing work, it's like how we're going to start decolonizing and having these important conversations. And that was, you know, a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing that's youth led is where the work's happening. So I'm just, you know, really excited to be able to be part of this and to hear. And if there's any way in which we can support a lot of the youth organizing that's happening, that's what I want to hear and learn about and support in terms of bringing, you know, I think it's like a call for action, or asking like, where can we bring resources? Where can we bring the tools to make this happen? So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Do any of you all want to share anything? Last words?
I just want to say thank you for also allowing me to learn a lot and share my experiences and my thoughts on social justice and youth organizing and things like that. Yeah, I feel like it was really important. And I like the group that we had because it was diverse. Like the audience and our speakers are diverse, and I feel like it brought up many different outlooks on these topics. I feel like it's very important for these things to happen and really to see the outlook of different things. Like we were saying before, when we have a group of people of different backgrounds and you bring up different topics, and it just gets you to think that there's more things out there that I'm not exposed to, but I know that I am able to help, that person by just listening to them and then figuring out ways to help them. Yeah.
My final words will be follow Detroit Hills Detroit on Instagram. Check us out on our website. There's a lot of great tools, a lot of great youth doing great things. And also, I think it was Fred Hampton who said this, but theory without practice, it ain't shit. So like, we need to do the work. Sometimes these feel good conversations, they don't go anywhere but this. So we need to do the work. We're far from done. And uplift youth. The youth aren't the future. The youth are now. Give youth power. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for all bringing your amazing selves here. Dillon, do you want to?
I was going to say, keep on listening to the youth, because they're the experts on their own experiences, like they both said. And I think for the social work educators and also students in the room, think about how this conversation can be taken back to your coursework or your internships, and how, just like Kayla said, ensuring that this conversation doesn't stop here, right? And my cat is really trying to be part of this conversation right now. Make sure that this conversation is ongoing and that we're respecting intersectionality and intergenerational organizing, whether that be on a micro, meso, or macro approach, in any way that you're learning, teaching, or working for the betterment of communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a quick reminder, next on February 11th at 12 p.m., 12 to 1:30, we're having our next Engage session, which is about defunding the police in Detroit public schools. So we're going to have some pretty awesome organizers from 4824. Dillon, I hope you can join as well. Dr. Charles Williams, who is a scholar in criminal justice reform and the school to prison pipeline. So we hope you guys can join. Here is the RSVP in the chat, so you can sign up there. And otherwise, I just want to thank you all for being on. It was great, and resources will be sent out. So students of the Engage Community course, if you could stay on just for a quick debrief, that would be great. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.